Elizabeth Taylor, Nichols, 3 July 1912 to 19 November 1975, was a British novelist and short story writer. Kingsley Amis described her as one of the best English novelists born in this century. Antonia Fraser called her one of the most underrated writers of the 20th century, and Hilary Mantel said she was deft, accomplished and somewhat underrated. Life and writings. Born in Reading, Berkshire, the daughter of Oliver Coles, an insurance inspector, and his wife, Elsie May Futrell, Elizabeth was educated at the Abbey School, and then worked as a governess, tutor, and librarian. She married John Taylor, owner of a confectionery company, in 1936. They lived in Penn, Buckinghamshire for almost all their married life. She was briefly a member of the British Communist Party, then a lifelong Labour Party supporter. Taylor's first novel, At Mrs. Lippincotti's, was published in 1945 and was followed by 11 more. Her short stories were published in magazines and collected in 4 volumes. She also wrote a children's book. The British critic Philip Hencher called The Soul of Kindness a novel so expert that it seems effortless. As it progresses, it seems as if the cast are so fully rounded that all the novelist had to do was place them, successively, in one setting after another and observe how they reacted to each other. The plot never feels as if it were organized in advance, it feels as if it arises from her to act as mutual responses. Taylor's work is mainly concerned with the nuances of everyday life and situations, which she writes about with dexterity. Her shrewd but affectionate portrayals of middle-class and upper-middle-class English life won her an audience of discriminating readers, as well as loyal friends in the world of letters. She was a friend of the novelist Ivy Compton Burnett and of the novelist and critic Robert Liddell. Her long correspondence with the latter forms the subject of one of her short stories, The Letter Writers, published in The Blush, 1951, but the letters were unfortunately destroyed, in line with her general policy of keeping her private life private. A horror of publicity is the subject of another celebrated short story, Sisters, written in 1969. Ann Tyler once compared Taylor to Jane Austen, Barbara Pym and Elizabeth Bowen, soul sisters all, in Tyler's words. Elizabeth Taylor was also a close friend of Elizabeth Jane Howard, who was asked by Elizabeth Taylor's widower to write a biography following Elizabeth Taylor's death. Elizabeth Jane Howard refused due to what she felt was a lack of incident in Elizabeth Taylor's life. See Slipstream, Elizabeth Jane Howard's memoir, for more details on their friendship. Taylor's editor at the UK publisher Chatto and Windus was the poet D.J. Enright. Elizabeth Taylor died of cancer in Penn, Buckinghamshire, at the age of 63. In the 21st century, a new interest in her work was kindled by filmmakers. During the 1970s, Ruth Sachs Kaplan had authored an adapted screenplay based on Taylor's novel. Kaplan's screenplay languished for decades, until her son, Lee Kaplan, purchased the rights to the film in 1999. Ruth Sachs Kaplan's film adaptation, Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont, directed by Dan Ireland, was finally released in 2005 with British actress Joan Plowright in the title role. French director François Ozon made a 2007 film of the real life of Angel Deveril entitled Angel, with Romola Garai. Bibliography of her works. Novels. At Mrs. Lippincotti's, 1945. Palladian, 1946, shows most clearly the influence of Jane Austen. A View of the Harbour, 1947. A Wreath of Roses, 1949. A Game of Hide and Seek, 1951. The Sleeping Beauty, 1953. The Real Life of Angel Deveril, published as Angel, 1957. In a Summer Season, 1961, is her most sex-infused work, telling the story of a rich woman who marries a man 10 years her junior. The Soul of Kindness, 1964. The Wedding Group, 1968. Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont, 1971. The author's actress namesake is probably alluded to when it is announced that the blousy Mrs. Burton is coming to stay at the hotel. Blaming, 1976. Posthumous. Short story collections. Hester Lilly, 1954. The Blush and Other Stories, 1958. A Dedicated Man and Other Stories, 1965. The Devastating Boys, 1972. Includes Sisters and Flesh. Dangerous Calm, 1995. A selection of her stories and 2 previously unpublished short stories. Complete Short Stories, 2012. Collects all of the works in the first 5 short story collections. Elizabeth Taylor, A Centenary Celebration, 2012. Short stories uncollected and complete short stories including unpublished and incomplete stories, and essays and letters. You'll enjoy it when you get there. The Stories of Elizabeth Taylor, 2014. A selection of her stories. Short stories. For Thine is the Power, Tribune, the 31st of March 1944. A Nice Little Actress, Modern Short Stories, August 1944. Better Not, The Adelphi, October-December 1944. A Sad Garden, Modern Reading, March 1945. It Makes a Change, The Adelphi, October-December November 1945. Mothers, Here Today 1945. Husbands and Wives, New Short Stories 1945-1946, ed. John Singer, 1946. Ever So Banal, Kite, Spring 1946. Simone, Writing Today, Summer 1946. The Light of Day, The Harper's Monthly, December 1947. Red Letter Day, The New Yorker, the 27th of November 1948. First Death of Her Life, The New Yorker, the 19th of March 1949. After Hours of Suffering, Vogue, July 1949. The Beginning of a Story, The New Yorker, the 29th of October 1949. Nods and Becks and Wreathed Smiles, The New Yorker, the 19th of November 1949. Gravement and Homage, The New Yorker, the 7th of October 1950. Plenty Good Fiesta, The New Yorker, the 14th of July 1951. Oasis of Gaiety, The New Yorker, the 18th of August 1951. The Idea of Age, The New Yorker, the 9th of February 1952. Spry Old Character, The New Yorker, the 7th of March 1953. Swan Moving, The New Yorker, the 26th of December 1953. Goodbye, Goodbye, The New Yorker, the 14th of August 1954. Poor Girl, The Third Ghost Book, ed. Cynthia Asquith, 1955. Hare Park, The New Yorker, the 14th of April 1956. The Ambush, The New Yorker, the 2nd of June 1956. The True Primitive, The New Yorker, the 11th of May 1957. The Rose, the Mauve, the White, The New Yorker, the 22nd of June 1957. The Blush, The New Yorker, the 17th of August 1957. You'll enjoy it when you get there, The New Yorker, the 23rd of November 1957. A Troubled State of Mind, The Cornhill Magazine, Spring 1958. The Letter Writers, The New Yorker, the 31st of May 1958. Perhaps a Family Failing, The New Yorker, the 5th of July 1958. Summer Schools, The New Yorker, the 6th of September 1958. The Benefactress, The New Yorker, the 5th of December 1959. The Thames Spread Out, The New Yorker, the 19th of December 1959. A Dedicated Man, The New Yorker, the 4th of June 1960. The Prerogative of Love, The New Yorker, the 23rd of July 1960. Girl Reading, The New Yorker, the 29th of July 1961. In a Different Light, The New Yorker, the 29th of July 1961. As If I Should Care, The New Yorker, the 19th of May 1962. Mice and Birds and Boy, The New Yorker, the 9th of February 1963. Mr. Warden, The New Yorker, the 8th of June 1963. The Voices, The New Yorker, the 20th of July 1963. In the Sun, The New Yorker, the 18th of April 1964. Vron and Willie, The New Yorker, the 16th of January 1965. Hotel du Commerce, The Cornhill Magazine, Winter 1965. 66. The Devastating Boys, McCall's May 1966. Tall Boy, The New Yorker, the 31st of December 1966. In and Out the Houses, The Saturday Evening Post, the 14th of December 1968. The Flypaper, The Cornhill Magazine, Spring 1969. Sisters, The New Yorker, the 21st of June 1969. Well, here we are, McCall's December 1969. The Blossoming, Saturday Book Story, 1972. The Wrong Order, Winter's Tale 1972. Madame Olga, McCall's August 1973. Children's Book, Mossy Trotter, 1967. Quotation, The whole point is that writing has a pattern and life hasn't. Life is so untidy. Art is so short and life so long. It is not possible to have perfection in life, but it is possible to have perfection in a novel.